We're going to start because we're a little time. What is this in? 4:45. 4:45.
Yeah.
All right, you were good? Okay, hey everybody, welcome to our CEDA business meeting at NCA. So yeah, we have some pretty important things to talk about, so I'm going to try to just get through at least the parts of business that I'll be covering really quickly. First, I want to give some CEDA Nationals updates. The first is that ML and I had a meeting with Derek about figuring out finalizing the hotel, the contract, everything like that. It looks like it's coming along really well. It looks like it's going to be at the La Quinta, which is the hotel that was in the bid paper. And so we'll be coming out with information about that block pretty shortly. The rate that we were discussing, I think, was $109 before tax, basically, per room per night. We're going to have the rooms at the hotel, which is great. We're going to have some nice hors d'oeuvres and things. Hopefully, we're going to have some really cool Seattle DJ come and spin the party for the kids. All that good stuff. It's going to be cool. So
For the kids.
yeah, for me. We based our costs off of getting like attendance as last year. Last year we ended up with 88 teams, so we based it off of 90. The fees will marginally increase. We're going to keep the host fees the same. The entry fees will be $150 per team. Which my understanding is this is the first fee increase we've had in a decade, so even besides for costs, it's probably a long time coming. And I think that the most important thing for all of us to do is to really just push for attendance. You know, I'd really like to see us have much more than 90 teams. And, you know, we've made this move under, you know, difficult circumstances in order to make it accessible to all of our community members, and so I think it behooves us to get people out there. So, you know, bring your teams, talk to other people, get them to bring their teams. Yeah, let's have a good CEDA. So that's first. We have a top paper award. So for the CEDA top paper award goes to Sarah Mathis, who wrote Urban, or #Urban, Performing Poverty and the Troubled Legacy of UDLs and Intercollegiate Debate. So congratulations. And then just some things to look forward to before our next meeting or what's going to happen in that meantime. We'll be talking about this more extensively when we get to new business or continuing business. But right now we are trying to work out a deal with NSDA regarding tap room. That's pretty much the kind of most important order of business that needs to be worked on. And so to the extent that we can get community input about this, the better. Also, after speaking with a number of people in our community, as you all know, there's been a kind of explosion of discourse around sexual harassment, sexual assault recently in the broader mainstream public, which is kind of really amazing and really rare. So I think that it also behooves us to use this as an opportunity to reinvigorate valuable discussions on our own squads and with our peers about making sure that the spaces that we live in are spaces that everyone can live in without harassment or assault. So I'm going to be working with some people, CV and ML included, to just kind of help reinvigorate that discussion. If anybody's interested in being a part of that, that would be amazing. Let me know. And you know, thinking about best practices and ways that we can kind of collectively support our members. and challenge rape culture in our community. So those are two pretty big items. First VP is Scott Harris, who is not with us right now. I'm going to take his. We have a potential 2019 CEDA host, that's UCF. Nick, you're awesome. Yes. And also we'll be soliciting more bids for 2019. Also looking for a summer meeting host for June. If anybody is interested in hosting the summer meeting, please let us know. Yeah. All right, second VP.
No official business, but thank you for being here.
All right. Treasurer's report.
We have currently 12 schools that have paid dues for this year. Probably more. The communication, people who are paying on AFA website, the communication there is still really slow, and I am not convinced that we're getting either a correct list or the correct money coming to us. So if it's possible for you to pay through our own website, that is the more direct way of paying. 12 people have done that so far. And I do want to remind everyone that we have a graduated fee dues schedule. If you pay by December 15th, it's $150, but it goes up from there.
The 15th, right?
The 15th, right? The only money that we have spent that's not routine, I've paid the insurance up to date, all of that stuff. The only money that we really have spent has been on the summer meeting, and we came in well under budget for that. So that was really helpful since things have been a little tight. And all in all, right now we have $30,000 in reserve. And I've got all of this if you want details on any of the items. I don't want to take time to go through that since we do have important information, but I do have it all up to date today if anybody wants to see me after the meeting.
Okay. Executive Secretary.
Just a couple things, like Imola said, we had 12 people paid so far this year. Both the amendments from the summer passed, the sanctioning rule and the novice points rule both passed. And we had 3 new programs, so Columbia, Arkansas, and Occidental College joined CEDA so far. So that's good. It's an expansion. I think it's about what I
Okay, cool. Oh, and we just had 2 amendments.
But those both, the sanctioning and the novice points amendment both passed.
Recording Secretary, Louis isn't here, but I don't think Louis has any business. Okay, other agenda items. Let's start with Ben. You want to talk about?
Sure.
Yeah.
So I think that it's becoming pretty apparent that we have more and more kind of Black participation in coaching and attempts to get directorships in the debate community. And a group of people and I have started working on putting a conference together to help the kind of transition of that process from being a debater to being a coach to wanting to be an administrator, and what does that mean? We also think that it's useful to, at that time, also have some therapeutic agenda items that also exist. So the idea is we are in the process of securing, I think we've already secured the hotel for the conference in Atlanta, but the idea is to have a conference for Black students that want to become coaches, or that people that are coaches and want to become directors, so that they know how to make the day-to-day parts of administration work. And the idea was we wanted to ask CEDA if it was possible for potential scholarships or stipends to these individuals, because it still very much is going to be an academic conference. And we're not looking for them to cover the entire cost, but there may be folks that they're a part of a program and they just can't afford to go to a conference. So we thought it would be a good idea to ask the different organizing bodies if they would be open to the potential of sponsoring, 2 or 3 people to go to this conference that, like we said, should be this summer. It should be the first one that we're going to hold, and we're going to try to do it every summer. So this would not be like a one-time thing. We're looking for kind of a long relationship and building kind of a platform for diverse, coaches. We think that's a good thing. So if people have questions, I can answer questions.
Do you think it'll just be toward policy? Like, would it be any other styles of debate?
So we interesting enough, last night we met with 2 coaches that work here in Texas. They work at Texas Southern, but they do party.
Mm-hmm.
And I got their contact information because we're interested in kind of expanding that. Obviously, the resources and the platform for party is different from policy, and we get that, but we think some of the same issues that we run into, they would also run into, so we think there is some commonality. So yes, we're open to other platforms as well. We just have to be a little bit more adventurous and go out and meet those people, because we like to kind of be, close network, so.
Why not forensics go as well on just different platforms today?
Hmm?
Reach out to speech programs as well.
Yeah. No, I mean, Chantrice Martin, James Rowland, and myself are like the 3 people that are primarily working on it, and we all have direct backgrounds to policy. So it's not like we are foreclosing the possibility of others. It's just, like I said, some of us are more social butterfly-ish than others.
For sure.
And the 3 people we have on the panel are probably not, the 3 people we have organizing are probably not the best people to go out and get a bunch of other people to come do it. So, plus we didn't want to, one thing we definitely want to make sure is that we don't overstretch ourselves and make it bigger than we can accommodate at the beginning, which is a very, very, for us, is a very big deal. We want to still keep it academic, like we still want people to submit papers so that we understand what the topics we will be discussing, but we also, at this time, we're not ready to accommodate like 70 coaches. It's not very plausible for us to do at this time. So I think that's why the very first one is mostly policy people. There are a couple of other people we have on the guest list that are just, psychiatrists, or they have backgrounds in speech, but they don't do speech, so they're on the administrative side. So we're looking at different avenues, but I would say in the future, yes. Going all the way to even speech or forensics would be possible too.
I want to consider inviting some scholars from communication, NCA, and CEDA would be some things as well.
Yeah.
So they would be able to
Yeah.
offer some scholarships in addition to, and that way maybe if CEDA can or cannot, multiple scholarship platforms.
Yeah.
There might be
It's gonna
also to be coaches that can't pay for their travel or not staying there. So there could be something for the individuals who are running the workshops to accommodate that stipend.
Yeah.
And they do this for like faculty workshops every summer.
Okay.
NCA does.
NCA does. They do like a stipend of some sort. There's like a workshop. They invite 12 people. You have to apply for it. But it's essentially like a week of like readings that get done, workshop, for ideas.
Okay. Yeah, that's like.
I think I support this. I think it's a great idea, and I'm happy that you all are working on it. I think this idea fits well into the structure we already have set up for many grant proposals. And I think if you will write up a request, and I believe there's a template for it. I was going to look, but I can't get that.
I can send you Paul Mayberry's grant.
Okay,
Yeah.
and then that would be voted on by the EC, but this is a good opportunity for anyone to speak in opposition, so that, or in support, or you can talk to your EC member too. But I think it fits well with that structure that we already
I
have.
still have that line item budgeted in there.
Thinking that would be served.
Okay, perfect. Great.
And to my knowledge, we have not received any requests so far.
Not even when it was advertised.
Okay.
Cool. I'm gonna table that one. I think that was actually something here. Team constraints, best practices. Just have you done to. Okay. Before talking about tab room, I just wanted to first ask if anybody wants to do any last minute nominations for the with many positions that we have open up, no nominations.
Do you have every position at this time of nomination?
I'm sorry,
Does every position have at least one nomination?
it does. Yeah, okay, great. We were successful. And I'm just gonna announce them. All right, our nominations are for second vice president, Brian Rubai, Lindsay Shook, Nick Ryan, and Sam Mauer. For topic committee rep, we have Michaela Mawson, Michael Barlow, Willie Johnson, and Vita Cheery. For recording secretary, we have Nick Shulo and Christiana Baez. For regional reps, North Central, we have C.V. Vitola Haddad. For South Central, we have Kate Ritchie. For Northeast, we have Samantha Godby and Catherine Medina, although I think Catherine may or may not have said that she doesn't want to run, I'm not sure. So she's here until she says otherwise. And for Mid-Atlantic, we have Jackie Pabst, Al Hilland, and Nick Ryan. Cool. All right, let's get into it. Some tavern.
Be the fun part, right? So I've been doing some negotiating with NCA. I sent out an email to the executive committee, so hopefully they've distributed that. Your regional reps should have that information. So I'm just going to quickly review the arguments in favor of a relationship with Taproom, give some suggestions for costs, and then I will, we can kind of go over the details of those. So, Jen, I guess, do people want me to review the arguments in favor of the relationship with Taproom, or is that something that, yes, no?
I think that might be useful.
Okay, so I think there are two major arguments in favor of the deal. One is that payment for Taproom is inevitable. Either NSDA will be deciding those costs or CEDA will be deciding the costs. So it's a question of whether CEDA pays for the service and distributes that cost as it sees fit through kind of a democratic process, or as kind of representative democracy, as democratic as that can be, or if the NSDA kind of decides that individual tournaments can decide either pay the cost for NSDA or do alternative mechanisms of tapping their tournaments. I think that there are 3 DAs to individual tournaments paying for access. You can tell I'm this policy thing. First, it may price out smaller tournaments or discourage tournaments from offering free entry or very low entry costs because they will have to pay whatever the fee is that NSDA decides on. Second is it would encourage people to use a variety of platforms to tab and administer tournaments. I can tell you that this is the status quo for parliamentary debate right now, and it's terrible. There's like 4 different websites that people use to tab results, have their tournaments, etc. It's a bunch of administrative mess and confusion with managing entries, results, tournament travel. They all become kind of a pain as opposed to one centralized source for all that for CEDA. The third is unpredictable costs. NSDA fee structure can change based on size of the tournament or any criteria, whereas CEDA has at least some sort of check where CEDA would be able to dictate what the costs are. They'd be more predictable for programs. And I'll talk in a minute about how I think those fees could be done. So I think there is kind of a public good for keeping Taproom as the kind of consistent place where policy debate is run from, tapped from, etc. And I think it's a better idea for CEDA to have some sort of influence over the fee structure for Taproom as opposed to leaving it all up to NSDA, which can be more responsive to its members. The second big kind of argument in favor is that it centralizes access to data. There's a lot of data that we use Taproom for. So CEDA paying for Taproom access means that Taproom will continue to be a centralized source for publicly available data. So sweepstakes, team results, points will continue to be centralized. It's really good for universities, for PR, et cetera, to say, these are, so we're first in CEDA, first in these kind of points and things like that. I also think it's a really good thing for students who can go and kind of check their results, see how they're doing. Also, I know usually at the end of the semester, at the end of the year, they have, like, here are the top 50 speakers in the country that's centralized on there. So I think students really enjoy that. It's also what most students use for high school, so the transition for them between high school and college on Taproom. is good. So I think those are the two major arguments, just that having a central place for debate to kind of happen online and for it to be managed by CEDA as opposed to a private organization is good, and I also think it maintains centralized access to data. Quickly, how to pay for Tabroom. I think there are two ways, because it is just for access to Tabroom, they're asking for $10,000 a year for that access. And there's a bunch of other stuff I can go through that they've included in that, but basically that's it. I think that there are two ways that CEDA could pay for this. One is, especially since the new amendment passed that requires CEDA membership to be a CEDA sanctioned tournament, would be to charge tournaments for CEDA sanctioning, which I think, I did some kind of rough math, I'm really bad at math, so I hope this makes sense. If there are 40 CEDA sanctioned tournaments, which is pretty accurate, in 2016, 2017, there were closer to 50 if you include district qualifiers and round robins. But with a minimum of 40 tournaments, the cost could be entirely covered by charging each tournament $275 to host their tournament on Tabroom. When distributed across a tournament with like 40 entries, that's like a $10 entry increase in entry fees for the tournament, or if schools have somewhere in their budget to pay for that, that'd be totally up to them. This would also allow CEDA to offer waivers to tournaments that cannot afford, if that's an undue burden for the tournament, or tournaments that know they're free tournaments and tournaments that offer very low entry fees. So those tournaments, instead of having to say, remember this, absent this deal, those tournaments would have to pay for access to Tabroom. It would be most likely more than $275. The running rate for most tournaments at the minimum is $300, $350 from NSDA for access to Tabroom. And they also do it based on the size of the tournament. So larger tournaments are going to be, I think this Scott said, all the way up to over $1,000 a tournament for a large tournament, just for access to Tabroom. So it would allow CEDA to control those costs, but also allow CEDA to allow waivers to those costs for tournaments that can't afford them. Alternatively, CEDA could raise membership fees at 75 members, which is last year where we were at around 80, but I took out 5 for new and emerging programs. It would be an increase of $150 in membership fee to guarantee access to Tabroom. I personally like the tournament payment model better because it more fairly distributes costs. In other words, a small school with like 1 team shouldn't have to pay the same for Tabroom access as a big school with like 100 teams or whatever. So I think that's why I kind of like the tournament payment model. It more evenly distributes costs. It also avoids non-CEDA members participating at tournaments but not paying into the system. There are a lot of people who aren't CEDA members who participate at tournaments. So if it's only CEDA members that are paying for that, it seems like a little unfair to me. So I would say, and you know, for my suggestion in thinking about this, that we could easily cover the costs of the relationship with having tournaments pay to access Tabroom. So are there any questions? Yeah.
I am opposed to the membership.
Mm-hmm.
I am open-minded to the by tournament payment system. If that were the case, how could we control who has access to enter their tournament until we get the money?
Well,
Like
we
that.
would, sorry.
Just like that.
Yeah.
We turn off their access, so they couldn't download whatever they needed to run their tournament.
So when you set up a tournament on Tabroom, you have to get it approved. And right now, that approval process is basically just Palmer approving everybody, because that's the way, at least for college, that Tabroom works. In the future, you would have to be on, you know, CEDA would verify that you paid the fee in order for you to get access to Tabroom for your tournament. So the NSDA wouldn't approve a tournament's access to Tabroom until CEDA said, you're good to go.
Which is easy to do. We have access to that now. I approve some tournaments too. A bunch of people who are on the ABT CEDA administrator list get an email anytime somebody requests. And so you log in, there's another link, and we cover up.
Yeah,
So are they willing to streamline that and take like Jeff off and all these other people that can not?
Yeah, they would, I mean, the way, I'm glad someone finally said it.
No, No, it needs to be streamlined, and we need to write it into officers' responsibilities and that.
Yeah, and that could easily be done. I'm assuming it would just involve taking people off the admin list for NDT CEDA that we don't want on there. But I think that would be very easy to limit who can approve those to make sure that everyone is paying the CEDA sanctioning fee.
Can I ask a question? So we obviously have tournaments that are a lot larger, like Wake and the national tournaments. Would it make sense to tier the tournaments? Like you charge $1,000 for Wake, but you charge $100 for a regional?
Yeah, I mean, the fee structure can be negotiated like that. Like I said, I'm bad at math, so when I started thinking of like something more complex and this divided by this, I got confused. So there's certainly other ways to do it. The easiest way is just a flat fee.
Right.
And that, with the number of tournaments we have, would be around 275. I just kind of wanted to show the basic of what we're talking about if it's equal for everyone. Yeah.
I was originally opposed to the idea because 10,000 I had sticker shock. But I think the math is actually better than you described. I think we had about 57 tournaments last year. So if you just say 50, that's really just $200 a tournament. And I mean, honestly, $200 a tournament spread out over the cost of even a small tournament. It's just a few dollars extra per person in the entry fee. And so I'm really not quite as opposed as I used to be. I actually think CEDA should try to negotiate a much longer term deal with opt-out at our choice. Because, and the concern I think we legitimately have is how many people we'll have in a couple of years. How many tournaments will there be? And will we begin to price ourselves out of that model as well? I think we should try to get a 10-year agreement with them with a modest escalation in fees for their inflation, with the ability for us to opt out on even a year's notice, so that if it's no longer viable economically, we could. But 2 years is probably not long enough time for us, given your first argument that we need this service.
Is there a way?
That would complicate NSDA's position, I think. But I certainly think we could come back to them and say, we have support, but maybe we want a longer, especially if we had escalating fees. So I think the concern that they had when I was talking to them about the amount of years is that, at least initially, they kind of were very strongly in favor of the 2-year thing, although that's what we had in our original notes, so that's all I talked to them about, because they need to figure out their costs for what this all is as well, practically, so how many hours, and things like that. But yeah, I think we could go back to them and say, can we expand that to 5 years, 10 years, or something like that, and that could be something that they would be, especially if there was a natural increase worked into that, but it's something I think they'd be maybe open to.
And to an average of 200, at your point, 300 for a large tournament, 100 for a small tournament. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just split it in half. Both size tournaments can handle those fees without any.
Yeah, and like I said, the numbers I gave are just to give people an idea that, because I do think the 10,000 seems really daunting until you break it down. And that breakdown, I think, was hopefully give people an idea. We're talking like $200–300 a tournament, and those costs are inevitable for tournaments if people want to use tab room. So if people think that tab room is a public good and one place for all of CEDA to kind of happen, then there has to be a cost. And the question is just whether or not we control that cost through our negotiating power, or whether NSDA controls those costs for our member schools.
Regardless of whether or not it's for 2 or longer, is there, it seems to me that in the contract it should be stipulated how much are we of an increase, like we should have a not to be increased more than X percentage over a period of time, because I think a lot of people are concerned that it could be, rampant price gouging unpredictably once we're kind of at their mercy. Is that possible?
Yeah, and I for sure think that's something that would, have to be negotiated. I agree with, I definitely think that's a good idea. And I think putting in there kind of, we're not saying that after 2 years, if you think there's a cost that we're not calculating, that you can't raise it at all or anything, but that it has to be fair and able to negotiate through that. That makes sense to me, and I think they'd be pretty amenable to that, to increasing that. And I think they would especially be, if you do 2 years up front, especially after that. I think that after the 2-year kind of trial period for both CEDA and the NCA to negotiate or figure out if this is all going to work as everyone expected. After that, I think a long-term deal would be very easy. But I didn't speak to the NSDA about anything other than the 2 years, so I don't know for sure what the response to that would be, just because the 2-year lock-in is kind of what we had talked about as well. So I could definitely go back to them and say, how about a longer kind of trial period?
And I'm just brainstorming in terms of like small tournaments versus large tournaments. If we don't know, there's going to be an increase at some point, right, in this that we should probably be preemptive about, right? So would it make sense to like just say a flat like $5 per participant per tournament, right? And then like maybe a regional tournament, you would meet the what the $100 for like a tournament like Wake or something, right? We'd be paying, there'd be more money in the pot than you would need, right? Then perhaps you have a line item, right, that actually accumulates money in cases of increases.
Yeah, for sure. I think we can, my numbers are just covering costs. I definitely think there are ways that you could structure the fees in a way that actually, help CEDA in the future for if there is an increase, but also cover a tournament that say can't, that cost is prohibitive, or they don't have a way to include that in their budget. So yeah, for sure, I think there's a way that you could, the fees thing I think is really easy, a lot easier than I think we thought initially to get the money to make this happen, and there's a lot of ways that we can do that to kind of protect CEDA's resources as well as prepare for any potential increase. Could also help the reserves a little bit if we think that we're getting a better deal than the NSDA is offering. Now, the one thing I will say is that this deal doesn't make a ton of sense if we're charging tournaments more than NSDA would just to use tab room on their own. So part of the major reason why I after in the last year thought this was a good idea is because it should make it cheaper than the alternative, which is just NSDA. And I think by collectively working, we can do that. So that'd be the one thing I'd suggest if people want to talk about different fees, is to make sure the escalating fee structure doesn't make it so the larger tournaments, they'd be better off just having tab room.
And that cost of what per tournament? Is it 1,000? Is that right?
Could get up to there, yeah. So, you'd have to talk to some high school tournaments that are paying that now, but the bigger high school tournaments could pay that. And that's also the thing, is it's like just up to the NSDA now, So if CEDA has some ownership in that, then we know what the price is. But absent that, we, could be anything.
Are there, go ahead, I heard that brain fart.
Oh, just thinking about just concerns and express. Are there, certainly some of the kind of more minor details could be negotiated on, like, for example, do we really need them to control the wiki? It's a question that's been posed.
Yeah, Palmer controls the wiki now.
Right. But individually, is that right?
Yeah, that's just his individual server. So moving it onto the NSDA server, no, we don't need to. And that's a cost that, they're charging us for that. That's not coming free in the 10,000 because we do, yeah. So it's not it's actually a decrease, and assuming that the ADA wants to continue to co-host that, it's $100 cheaper than Palmer on his own, which is the reason why I included it in there. And I know $50 here, $100 here, it's not like a deal breaker, but I think it helps. But yeah, we certainly could say a lot of those items, especially the items that if you check out the email, they're the things that are additional charges for. Those are things NSDA is willing to do at reduced cost, but if we're to be like, no, we just want to keep this with Palmer, obviously that's Palmer's decision because it's his personal server and he's managing it. So we could do that separate if we wanted. It's $100 cheaper to do it through NSDA, and then it's part of an institutional agreement. But yeah, definitely not those things. Any of the extra stuff that we're asking from the NSDA, they would not be upset for like, we don't do that. They'd be like, okay, cool.
I've got a few questions. When do they want this to start? Like, which season, number one? Number two, do they want to be paid in advance or at the end of the season?
I think that stuff that can be negotiated. I think what they're most concerned about is having a commitment. And so what I would suggest, Amber and I are kind of talking about this. Well, first of all, my suggestion for the process is this has been a year now since we've started these negotiations, and the NSDA did tap CEDA for free last year. It's kind of a good faith effort. So my suggestion at this point was, now that the information is out there to the regional reps, that we would give everybody a month or maybe a little bit more to kind of go back to their constituents to figure stuff out, and then have an executive committee vote after that. And then from there, once we have a yes to the agreement, we can go back to NSDA and say, okay, so we want this to start next year. And what I would suggest is pay half at each semester, so we can collect tournament fees over the semester, and then pay half of it after the first semester, half after the second semester. Again, this isn't a deal breaker as far as money for the NSDA. This is not like a big business item for them, so I think they're pretty flexible on the payment schedule.
Have they mentioned anything about, or have you gotten any hint of them wanting to contract for a certain number of tournaments?
No. Everything has been, CEDA has access to tab room, and CEDA members can use it as with the same customer service level as NSDA members, which puts it into the top customer service level for NSDA.
When we talked with, I think his name was Scott, last year, he had, one of the original things he said was on the platform selling ads. Where did that go?
I didn't talk about that in the original discussion, just because all of the kind of tech stuff I talked about adding as we go. I'm sure that would be something that would be easy for them to do, to include that, at least at a reduced fee, but that wasn't included in the original.
That was more curiosity than anything else. I'm not convinced that would help. Jackie, you said we paid for the wiki already?
Yeah.
ADA pays.
No,
Half of it
ADA
was
and
split the cost.
CEDA.
CEDA split the dollars to Chris Palmer. I like how the treasurer is on.
Right.
We sent, I sent the
I've not
information.
paid Chris Palmer anything.
I sent you the email, him and you an email last year about it. We're supposed to split the costs with the ADA, and we have advertising space on there for that as well. It's 600, 300 from us, 300 from the ADA. I think we did pay.
Last year we paid, I don't think anybody's paid them this year, including the ADA.
Yeah.
Speaking as the ADA treasurer.
I'm pretty sure we did pay last year though. No, I can look through the emails and send you the email.
I'll just look through the bank account.
And this goes to kind of the long-term question, and I imagine perhaps during negotiations right now, they wouldn't want to give this away, like how much it would go up to after 2 years, right? Is there any sense of that at all, or that's kind of?
The only sense is if there's a burden on their tech team that they haven't thought of.
Okay.
And it seems like they've been pretty thorough. They had a meeting with all of their tech people and everybody, and they all said that they think this is at that cost that it's acceptable. So the only thing that could happen to increase fees is if there is some sort of burden that they didn't consider in their original assessment of.
So right now it's just kind of inflation. I just don't want us to get into a position where it's like 10,000 for 2 years and we're all happy. It's like $200 a tournament, and like that's not that much to pass that cost on. And then they come back and like, well, it's $20,000 now.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think putting a cap on any potential increase is a good idea. And I think that they would be pretty okay with that. But
If we told them that we were not interested at all in this deal and we're pursuing alternatives, would tab room be shut down as soon as we told them that, or would it be at the end of the season?
didn't really address that. I think it could be, I mean,
Because that's
kind
the
of
thing
like
I'm
as soon
interested
as
in, it
possible.
seems like we're kind of indebted to the track that tab room is the only option, which maybe isn't the truth, like, I don't know, like.
Yeah, I think, well, the thing is, and this is kind of what happens when you have a monopoly on the market, is that right now it is. So I think that's another thing about the 2-year structures that could also give people the ability to take those 2 years and start to see if there's a possibility for an alternative to tab room, or if they really are.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out, like, if we can make it last for the rest of this season and we have a summer, if that is time enough to find a viable alternative.
If I were an SDA, especially given that they, they've made good faith efforts, I think that it would probably be cut off sooner rather than later. If I had to guess, but that's totally me guessing. That's not something they haven't threatened. So this is very positive kind of talking back and forth about this, but they would certainly have an incentive to if we rejected or just stopped negotiating, they would have an incentive to change over their structure pretty quickly.
We should be realistic too about what an endeavor like building it from scratch would.
Yeah, like,
No,
I'm just
I'm
trying
not
to-
saying you're saying, yeah, just like in 2 years might be a reasonable
Okay.
development time for that. It would be hundreds of hours.
June is, I don't think June is at all remotely viable. Even if we, in my limited conversations with some friends who are programmers about the task itself, it sounds like to find someone at a comparable cost of say $10,000, $11,000, especially assuming that it was someone who didn't already have a debate background and didn't have really intimate knowledge of all the different moving pieces of what we want, that that would already be a huge undersell of what that kind of task requires. So they would probably do not the best job, or it certainly wouldn't be what we're exactly looking for, not even close probably, to be honest. Especially in that time frame.
And the tech support aspect too, I think, is really important.
Yeah. That said, there are other alternatives. It would be a lie to say that there aren't, but they're certainly not as friendly, and they don't have the bells and whistles and things like that that we're talking about.
I also think we just,
What it is.
I was gonna say, in terms of being realistic too, is that, there are other platforms, and I've gone back and forth on this, and the thing that puts me in favor of one, I think when you break down the cost per tournament, it becomes more palatable. The second one is that it is a big endeavor in terms of like tech support during tournaments and people you'd have on standby, so I guess my thing is come around, it's really $10,000, right? You can break that down by tournament rate, that I would be comfortable even in a longer term contract, which was talked about, right? But giving ourselves 2 years to kind of figure it out, I think is important as well. So, just kind of my thinking right now. I think it's become more palatable. I think it would be a large undertaking for all of us who also have a bunch of other things to do to try to come up with the other platform. If in 2 years it develops, fine, but I think we're in maybe a better position than I thought coming into this meeting.
I'd like to see what a contract with a high school tournament looks like.
Yeah.
I mean, when comparing, because like, Wake Forest is a huge tournament for us, but compared to like the Cal high school tournament, it's it's like one of their 8 divisions or 10 divisions or something. So if they're paying $1,000, I mean, of course that's their core constituency, so maybe they would want to charge us more. But I'm just like, if numbers continue the way that they are, participation wise, I would be interested maybe if they would be willing to do it on a per participant fee. Like this tournament has 400 people attending it. Is it at that rate?
I don't know if there's much incentive for NSDA to agree to that, because then they could just say, well, if it's not an institutional, the big thing coming from NSDA is they want an institutional relationship with CEDA. That's what they're getting out of it.
Well, right, but it would be like, as CEDA grows, so let's say, we gained 10 schools or something, or there were a lot more participants, then it would increase. Presumably there would be more, more use of tab room based on those new programs, but if we contracted some, our costs would decline on a year-to-year basis. So it wouldn't be locked in, that we're gonna give them $10,000, but instead we would give them $1 for every person that enters a tournament that is sanctioned by CEDA.
Or maybe this is something, I love Shark Tank, so maybe this is something Shark Tank, not to interrupt. But like, what if it was the 2-year and then after that, it is the per-based entry or something like that? Because if it is about the relationship, but then there's also going to be an equal increase, then it is also something else, right? It's not just about the relationship, because there is the potential increase.
Sure.
And so if the increase is coming, we'll be negotiating, considering that as a way to negotiate.
Definitely, for sure. I think, yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think that's one of the reasons that the 2-year thing was, the NSDA was very interested in the 2-year thing, because they want a time for us to kind of figure all of this out and then have that opportunity to renegotiate in either direction. So whether it turns out that this price that they've calculated is too high for CEDA, or if there's another way to do that fee structure, that negotiation could all still happen, I think. But because there's a lot of unknowns right now about the costs that this could create. This is their estimate of what they think the value is. So 2 years of that to kind of figure out if it's the best fee structure or something like that. I don't know how willing NSGA would be to kind of play that numbers game, so the per individual thing. I also don't know if that comes out best for CEDA, I'm not sure. So.
Maybe, still it'd be nice to see what a high school contract looks like, or what they currently charge Cal. I mean, it doesn't have to be by school though or something, but just to see what their fee structure.
Their fee structure is between 300 and the explanation given for me for the largest tournaments, which is Berkeley and Harvard and the Glenbrooks, is well over 1,000.
How do they determine it? Okay.
But I think that's kind of the point though, is they just get to. So they determine it based on the amount that they think it will cost their tech involvement to make sure the tournament runs and things like that. So, I mean, I don't know their fee structure. That's kind of why I think it's important for CEDA to have a role in dictating the aggregate costs, because otherwise they can, NSDA, I don't mean to sound like negative about NSDA, but I don't really trust any business, that they have an incentive to increase costs if CEDA doesn't step in these kind of.
What exactly is is there a fee breakdown for what the $10,000 covers? Because it seems to me they already have this platform, it already exists, all the things that we need is already written into it. They're gonna have these tech people anyway. They just crashed today, did they not, or yesterday or something like that?
No, I talked about that. That was an internet problem with the Glenbrooks.
Oh, okay.
So the 10,000 cost is for the tech and the programming and updating. They have a new hire that they are hiring to just work weekends for tech support. They have 4 other staff members on tech support. So that 10,000 is their estimate for the cost of the labor to continue what they're doing for free. Because yes, they are doing these things now, but from the NSDA's perspective, they're losing money doing these things now because the labor for tech isn't being covered by anything.
So the $10,000 purely and only covers tech support, is that?
Not just tech support, but also continued advancement of the tab room. So just the staff and labor
So just
costs.
also reinvestment back into the technology.
Mm-hmm. So the cost is basically labor.
So 2 comments. One, I ran the USC round robin 2 weekends ago, and I didn't think that there would be technical difficulties with tab room, but I did experience one where I spent an hour trying to figure out how to pair the final debate, which is the E1 debate. And I finally would have paid anyone anything just to help me figure this out. But my instructor was phenomenal, responded to my email so quickly, within 3 minutes, was on the phone with me, figuring it out, fixing it. So I will say the tech support is phenomenal in that aspect. I think anyone that's probably done tab would agree. And then 2, I just have a question or maybe comment about payment structure. I do think it's important to negotiate the way in which those payments exist. So it feels like, for me anyway, that a lump sum per semester would be a lot, that maybe a monthly payment structure might be a better way to sort of decrease overall time, what that looks like. And then there are some tournaments where it might be a little bit more in a month versus another, like I think we probably have more tournaments in the middle of the semester, we've got to say like December and January and February. So maybe something like that, or even in the summer, so that the cost is dispersed across the year rather than like at the chunk of the semester, so everything else puts a lot of pressure on whoever has to do those meetings, initiate it, the accountants like, we could have that rolling monthly, might be better to mention it.
Yeah, and I would default to ML on the,
I'd rather it be the other way.
Oh, you think it, oh, okay.
Yeah,
it's just more predictable that way, I think. But yeah, for sure, I mean, that's a part that, you know, that's a whole another thing that y'all are gonna have to figure out after the deal itself is like, yes, we'll do this, and then how are we gonna structure that relationship with payment and stuff like that. There are a lot of different ways to do it, and I don't have particular expertise, and the only thing I'm worse at than math is money, so. Yeah.
one of the things that you wrote in the email sounds different to me than the discussion we had last year at this time, and that deals with grants. You said some cooperation on finding grants for CEDA. What will that be? I mean, if we're going to get into a contract with them and that is part of what we're paying for, what does some mean?
That would have to be discussed in the final stages of how much you thought. The way I talked about it was basically just consulting with their person who does grants and having them be on the lookout for applicable grants for CEDA and the NSDA doing together, as well as some things that CEDA might be able to take advantage of. So it's really more just kind of a consulting thing, and the details would have to be, you'd want to be clear on those details.
In your opinion, did they seem to be backtracking on what that could do for us, or?
No, I think they still think there's a lot of potential value, especially in grants with the NSDA and CEDA together. That's what they're really interested in.
Okay.
Because then, I mean, just kind of basic, we both make money in that sense. And they think that there's a lot of potential to write about grants, about connecting high school and college activity, and that could produce a lot of grants. So I think that's the main thing that they're most optimistic about, is that potential.
Do they realize that the CEDA sanctioned tournaments, the ADA sanctioned tournaments are the same tournaments? I don't understand why they want to charge the ADA, since the ADA tournaments are going to pay the same kind of CEDA fees.
I mean, I didn't talk to them.
Other ADA tournaments.
I didn't talk to them about the ADA stuff. I don't know what those negotiations have been like between CEDA and the ADA. I do think that there are some tournaments that are only ADA sanctioned.
No, that's not true.
There was last year, but there were tournaments that never applied for CEDA sanctioning that did have ADA sanctioning. That may not be true anymore, and that's fine. In that case, then, that's a pretty good. I mean, I guess ADA couldn't, if they didn't want to pay. I guess, I don't know. I didn't talk to them about the ADA. I only talked to them about CEDA. I have very little involvement with ADA, so I'm not particularly comfortable negotiating that or figuring out what y'all's conversations have been like with Tabroom. This could be an opportunity for the ADA to still get access to Tabroom if all of the tournaments are seeded stuff.
I'd just also say that, this is an opportunity for the organization potentially to also leverage its position vis-a-vis the rest of the debate community, perhaps bringing other people, to be purely cynical about it, we would become a monopoly on cheap access, essentially, to Tabroom, which might be a way to leverage some, people who have no other reason to pay CEDA membership dues, but do need to have access to Tabroom. Maybe it's a way to sort of broaden the scope of CEDA to some other members, give them a benefit that otherwise they might not have. In that case, if we doubled in size or something, because we brought some Carly, division into CEDA's purview or something, NSCA might want to increase the fees, but at least at that point, we would be negotiating from a stronger numbers position. I think that, the benefit of becoming the organization that controls the data and interface seems pretty big.
I have a question actually about the data. Well, to comment on the ADA, just after speaking with some folks, after Adrian and some others, it does look like it's possible that we could fold these into the same package.
They're the same term,
Yeah, it's
so
the
it
same, it's
doesn't
the
make
same
sense
thing.
to-
Yeah,
Right.
it makes sense.
Well, I think from, sorry to interrupt, I think from CEDA's perspective, I don't really see, like, we shouldn't deny ADA tournaments access if they're CEDA members, which is the new amendment, and they pay the structuring fee. I don't care what other affiliations, I mean,
Exactly.
maybe it's just, maybe I should be more ideological, but from CEDA's perspective, it's a public good. One thing I tried to do a lot is incorporating ADA and NUT and CEDA's kind of all towards the same goal. During my presidency, the wiki was a small example of that, but I don't think CEDA should have a problem saying we are the ones who are going to cover this cost through CEDA membership. And if someone wants to be a CEDA member and an ADA member, or and have tournaments that are sanctioned by both, I don't see why CEDA would have any problem with that.
A question I did have was about the data actually, and I don't even know where to begin this conversation, but it seems to me that they own the data.
I have no idea how this works.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just putting it out there, it looks like they own the data.
they could restrict access to the data.
That makes me uncomfortable. I don't know what we do with that, but it's on the table. So,
Well, they do now.
Yeah.
So they could restrict access to all of that data at any time they want. So,
Could we add that into the contract for these 2 years, that we get all of the former data?
protected?
Like, we just get it, like, it's ours, not theirs. Like, I don't know how that works.
Yeah.
I have no idea how that works. Yeah, that'd be a lawyer question.
Like that to happen, that was.
That's something I think we could definitely go back and say, data, protection of that data, ownership of that data is important. My guess is they would not have a problem with that. I mean, it's all freely available now,
Right.
so.
Yeah, they had, I don't know what your negotiations were like, but any willingness to reduce the cost from 10,000? I mean, they're firm on that?
Yeah.
Even if we couldn't pay? Or they're just saying you can't pay because we just charge people?
That number is firm. That is their assessment of the costs of the services that they're providing. Now, if CEDA wanted to do some sort of study that countered that and said this is the amount of labor we think that it costs for tab room, then maybe they could have a negotiating point, but they're firm on the 10,000 for access.
Yeah, just was wondering. Well, that's good to know.
Is that labor assessed just like they have to be on call during the existence of a tournament? And
part
if
of it.
so, then why does it matter what the size of the tournament is?
More potential for problems, and the problems are bigger, which I know seems kind of silly, but running tournaments, the bigger it is when a problem happens, it's a bigger problem. So it's just real simple, kind of linear.
Just intuitive. Okay.
The bigger, the more potential for problems.
Any last comments? We have 3 minutes.
About that particular generally.
Yeah, anything, because we have 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much, Gary. We were appreciated.
One thing real quick, so I'm going to try to push for an amendment to the NCA bylaws that will allow us to have a vote in the Legislative Assembly as CEDA. I think that odds are pretty good so far. I've gotten the, oh God, now I can't remember what they're call, that's embarrassing, but the critical studies people are on board, and the feminist people are on board because they like me and they think I'll vote with them, which they're not wrong. And so look for a petition that will be circulating pretty soon. I need to have the amendment in by February, and then we need 20% of all NCA membership to sign on to the petition to get it brought to the floor at next year's NCA. And so this is really one of those, like, if you're an NCA member, just sign it, send it to everyone. It'll take, a couple minutes. But just be aware that that's something I'm going to be pushing pretty hard for in a couple of weeks or a month about.
You need 90% of. 20.
Yeah, 20% of all NCA membership, and we've got 2 really big divisions that are willing to promote it, so it should be good.
Okay, cool.
All right.
Wow, thank you.
Yeah.
Is there any final business anyone wants to discuss? All right, thank you for coming. Thank you for your input. Yeah. Enjoy the parties.
And I'm happy to stick around if people have more questions or.
As a one. If you have a minute, can I interview?
Let me turn the live stream off and then we can talk about whatever we
Well,
want.
there's 2 different things.
Before I speak to either of you, I'm gonna try to speak to Kieran really quickly.
That's fine.